we still don't have a satisfactory answer as to why Leon Black, one of the richest men in this country, paid Jeffrey Epstein $170 million. I mean, it's just head-scratching.
G'day, I'm Lachlan Cartwright. Welcome back to the Breaker Pod. This week, we are at Delmonico's in downtown Manhattan, America's first fine dining establishment. It has been serving up tasty steaks since 1837. Cheers to restaurateur Max Tucci for inviting us down. If you would like your venue featured on the Breaker Pod, get in touch. Breaker at breakermedia.com. And it's quite fitting that we are here just steps away from Wall Street, because our next guest very much has been reporting on the powerful for many, many years now. She also doesn't need an introduction, but I'm going to give you one regardless. Vicki Ward has written about billionaires, princes, political operators, often before the rest of the press catches up. She's worked for Vanity Fair, CNN, and is a New York Times bestseller. Her reporting on Jeffrey Epstein, Jared Kushner, and the world of moneyed Manhattan power has both drawn admiration and controversy. She's worked for the glossiest magazines, tangled with the most litigious subjects, and built her own audience on Substack with Vicki Ward Investigates. Make sure you go and subscribe to Vicki Ward Investigates. And Vicki Ward joins us today. G'day, Vicki. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me,
Lachlan. Good to see you. You were really one of the first journalists reporting on Jeffrey Epstein before most people had ever heard his name. One of his main victims, Virginia Giuffre, who sadly took her own life, has released a book, Nobody's Girl, a memoir of surviving abuse and fighting for justice. You've read the book?
I have.
Just tell us about it, and what was your takeaway from it, from someone who has known this case, from the very beginning.
And I knew Virginia. I didn't know her, obviously, when I first was reporting on Jeffrey Epstein, when I met him in the fall of 2002. And the great irony about that is the fall of 2002 is exactly when she did her runner to Thailand to get away from him and never come back. But of course, she did come back in a different way to have to deal with Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. I did think that, I knew pretty much everything there was to know about Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. But I found Virginia Giuffre's book really powerful and really revealing in ways that I hadn't expected. It is very harrowing. She really was nobody's girl. She was abused from the age of 7. She claims by her own father. I mean, he has disputed that. But what I think is so interesting about it is she explains that by the time she meets Ghislaine Maxwell, famously at Mar-a-Lago, and by the time she gets drawn in to work for Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, part of the appeal for her is that they are weirdly the family she's never had. And I think what's really interesting about that, she sort of says, all the Epstein victims get asked again and again, why did you stay? If it was so awful, if you were being raped, if you were being abused, why did you stay? She stayed for 2 years, and she sticks her hand up. She went out and recruited other girls for him. And yes, she took drugs, and yes, she misremembered dates. She basically says, I am not, a flawless human being, nor necessarily a perfect witness. What witness is a perfect witness? What does that even mean? But she explains how psychologically complicated this story is, and I think that's one of the things I've always felt, sort of covering it for this long. It's a much messier story than most people believe. There are very few good guys in it, and I include the lawyers in
sure.
that. Everybody's got an angle.
Everyone's taking their cut.
Yeah,
Everyone
and a lot
is playing
and a lot of
different sides off.
And the survivors have not always historically been nice to each other. There's been a lot of
different factions
well,
and different
and
groups.
understandably, because, as Virginia says, she went out and recruited other girls because, and she says very honestly, because she wanted to be Jeffrey's number one. It mattered to her, and she says with remarkable honesty that one of the reasons she ended up leaving wasn't just because she'd had enough of the abuse. This is a woman who'd been, by that point, she was still a girl, but she'd been abused since the age of 7. She knew, with one glaring exception, a man she calls the Prime Minister, a guy, I think we all know who it is, who Epstein pimped her out to, who nearly choked her to death. But for the most part, she knew how to pull back during those awful encounters and sort of pretend she was sort of out of her body, as it were. She knew how to compartmentalize. But she finally wanted to get out of Epstein's household when she was afraid she might no longer be the number one girl, when he was bringing in a younger girl, Nadia Marcinkova, and Virginia had to teach her how to massage Jeffrey Epstein in the same way that 2 years earlier, Ghislaine Maxwell, exactly. And so it was very complicated. And in the book also, Virginia writes that she was shocked when she was, obviously she was in Australia, and there was a time difference when I was sitting through Ghislaine Maxwell's trial. During our day, it was night. Sure. In Australia, and so she would stay up, and so she learned via Twitter, as it then was, that one of the victims, Carolyn Andriano, sadly now dead, died of a drug overdose in 2023, blamed Virginia for bringing her to Epstein's house more than she blamed Ghislaine Maxwell. And Virginia writes with, again, remarkable candor, I'm ashamed to say I didn't remember her. And she didn't have to include that, by the way, in the book. But I think what's so telling about that is it gives you some idea of the scale of this enterprise. And I remember being completely stunned sitting through Ghislaine Maxwell's trial at the stories of how these girls just went in and out and in and out. I mean, it was like Piccadilly Circus in London. And I think that people still, to this day, and when I'm saying in and out, I mean out of Jeffrey Epstein's house in Palm Beach, I think people don't understand the scale of it. And I certainly hadn't got that until Maxwell's trial.
Are you amazed how this story keeps coming around? And I ask you that because in 2010 and 11, when I was at the New York Post, we were sitting off Epstein's Upper East Side spot, and we were observing people coming in and out, not underage girls, but young women. And this was off the back of the Prince Andrew Central Park
2011.
Photo in 2011. And I was a young reporter back then, and we did a stakeout, and I think we may have ran something, but no one cared back then. No one knew who he was, and no one cared. Then I was at the Daily News. I did a column there called Confidential, where I was out and about every evening, and I go to these Peggy Siegel film premieres, and there was this bloke there, and no one kind of knew where he fitted into all of this. That was Jeffrey Epstein, and Peggy was helping basically sort of bring him back into normal life. Then I'm at the Daily Beast in 2018, 19, during that period where he was arrested coming back from Charles de Gaulle. For me, as a journo, having these sort of different lenses over my career, I'm sort of amazed that this story continues to come back into the public domain, the public discourse, and this time obviously with Trump. Is that something you find sort of interesting and curious, that it kind of goes away and then it keeps coming back? And we've seen people like Prince Andrew again this time around lose his his titles because of it. So what are you?
Yeah, I if you had told me back in 2002, 2003, when I was dealing with this guy, and I'm not a victim of Epstein's sexual abuse, but he really, I had a really nightmarish pregnancy. No thanks to him. I mean, it was a really dark time. And if you had told me that you know,
20 odd years on.
I mean, and because as you say, nobody had heard of this guy.
Right.
People sort of, you know, the rich people in New York knew who he was. But again, only dimly. He wasn't written about in the newspapers.
Right.
He was just this shadowy Gatsby-like figure who no one knew where his money had come from. And he didn't go out. I mean, and he was sort of known. He did have an office at one point on Madison Avenue in the Villard House, but he wore track pants. I mean, he was a recluse. And so if you had said to me that all these years he would be this, you know, internationally infamous criminal, I would have been shocked. But I think the thing that's interesting about it, Lachlan, is that, you know, why is it that his name keeps coming back? And it does have to do with the nature, I think, of soft power. And he did understand how that really worked. I mean, he was a genius manipulator of it. I mean, when you think about the range of people whose photographs he had in that house, including the Pope, you know, as well as billionaires, you know, the dollar bill with Warren Buffett, but Bill Gates, and at the same time
he was in the
Middle
scientific
Eastern
world.
But it's all over the world, including obviously Prince Andrew.
Right.
And you know, one of the reasons. So yes, the sex crimes runs and runs, but I think we sort of have our arms more or less around that. What the stories that now keep, you know, bubbling up.
Who was protecting him?
It's the money. It's the bankers, right? It's the...
Who was complicit.
Who? Why we still don't have a satisfactory answer as to why Leon Black, one of the richest men in this country, paid Jeffrey Epstein $170 million. And then when you saw the emails that Jeffrey Epstein sent to Leon Black that came out in the New York Times, I think, last week, where Epstein is, you know, telling Leon Black that his children are quote unquote retarded, and the men and his financial advisors are idiots and being thoroughly threatening. And yet, the response to that email is that Leon Black pays him tens of millions of dollars. I mean, it's just head scratching. And one of the things that I thought was very strange was Jeffrey Epstein's phrasing when he said he'd been financially, he used the word safe. That's an odd word, odd adjective to use for someone as wealthy as that.
What more do you think there is to come out here, you know, whether it's on the Trump front or whether it's Prince Andrew or whether it's, you know, any number of other people? Do you think that there is more to come?
Well, I could never have predicted that, you know, as was reported, you know, a couple of weeks ago, that turned out that Prince Andrew had sent Jeffrey Epstein an email saying, let's play again, you know, having, I mean, all that Sarah Ferguson, you know, had also said to him, you know, written to him saying, I apologized in public, but I didn't really mean it. I mean, I think it's hard to know, right? Because I think what we're learning is that very powerful or very wealthy people are cocooned from reality. And when you're cocooned from reality, you end up writing or doing, you know, some extraordinary things. And it seems that a lot of these people wrote and did things that now they're looking in the rear mirror, wondering why their judgment was so off, but it was off. And I think it does have to do with the nature of power, and that, you know, when you fly that high, I think many people's feet float away from the ground, and that has consequences, and you're seeing those consequences play out in the Jeffrey Epstein story. I mean, it touches Jamie Dimon, even though, you know, the CEO of JP Morgan, even though, you know, I'm not suggesting for a second he knew Jeffrey Epstein, but he's not immune from all of this.
When you look back, what does the Epstein story really say about the media and how the media covers power and how the media covers abuse, because this story only really got going after Me Too.
100%.
You know, that's when it really started
Yeah.
to sort of take on this new life, and that's 2018, and you were on this in 2002. So there's 16 years here.
Yeah.
You know, where you know there wasn't too much being written or too much being. There was you were doing great work, but not too many other people were on this. And so, what does it say about the media and how we cover
Well, there
power?
was a huge cultural shift, and before that, nobody cared. And something my co-author James Patterson reminded me the other day, something that I've forgotten. I shouldn't have. He wrote a book called Filthy
Correct,
Rich.
which was turned into that Netflix
right,
show.
But
Right.
his book with John Connolly, wonderful guy.
R.I.P. John.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think was published in 2015, 2016. And Patterson, has a home in Palm Beach. He was intrigued by Jeffrey Epstein. So, and he didn't name the survivors. He gave them pseudonyms, but he had a lot of the documentation that then Julie Brown ran with for the Miami Herald, and she did name them. But Patterson went to the networks with Filthy Rich, and they were not interested. And people forget, so it really,
and that was
that
only
was
just on
2005. So think
cusp
about what
of
exactly
this thing imploded. Yeah.
So Me Too, I think, was huge, huge, and I think people forget. And it was actually both sides of the political aisle. Ben Sasse, there was the Republican senator from Nebraska, was also beating the drum on the wake of Julie Brown's reporting to sort of to make sure that Jeffrey Epstein faced the music. But yeah, it was because of Me Too, unquestionably.
Speaking of books, you've also authored a book about the Kushners, Kushner Inc. You wrote that in 2019. Talk to me about the evolution of that couple, because obviously Jared's back in the headlines with the Israel deal with Gaza. Talk to me about how you've sort of seen that couple evolve over the 6 years since that book was published.
Yeah, no, thank you for asking me that, Lachlan, because actually I was going to write about this in my Substack, because I've been thinking about it a lot, because I think probably people perceive me rightly as probably Jared Kushner's harshest critic. And I'm very proud of the work and the reporting in Kushner Inc. I really feel it was ahead of its time, and Congress actually kind of followed up afterwards. But and I feel I was able to see the conflicts in Trump's first administration to do with Jared and Ivanka, because I had written a book about the world of New York real estate.
Right.
And so I knew that the Kushners had this ticking time bomb in 666 Fifth Avenue. I knew that nobody in this...
Which is a building that they had...
Exactly. So I knew that they'd got a financial problem. And that only a foreign entity could help them solve it. And so I was looking at what Jared was doing in government with an eye to that, and I began to realize that sort of, because as you know, beat reporters are of necessity siloed, that nobody else was doing that, and that's in the end why I went out and reported that book. And I stand by the reporting in it, but I think two things can be true at once. And so the book was published in 2019. He obviously pulls off the Abraham Accords in 2020, at the end of the administration, right? And that was obviously a great achievement. I then reviewed the book, his own memoir, which I thought kind of conveniently left out a lot of his own wheeling and dealing with the Saudis, the Qataris, the Emiratis, and so on. Which are a critical part of the story. So, but what I do think, and here's the interesting thing, so what he achieved in Gaza is really extraordinary. And I think that all his financial ties, all the things that I wrote about in a negative light, were probably critical in pulling that off. I'm not sure it could have happened without that. And I think that, look, you have to give him
credit where credit's due.
I mean, it's an extraordinary achievement, and I think that, when certainly all the reporting I've ever done on that region suggests that, money talks in that region, and
as much as it does over here at Wall Street.
Yeah, but I think that in the Middle East, time moves at a different pace.
Sure.
And so often when one administration comes in and they think, well, we're not going to want to deal with them, they just sort of shut their eyes, close their eyes, and think, well, we'll wake up again in 4 years and see what's going to happen.
Right.
And I think that, Jared Kushner clearly, really understands that. I think he did go in there with the mentality of the real estate
wheeler dealer,
Yeah. And I mean, I was struck. I watched the 60 Minutes interview that he and Steve Witkoff did with Leslie Stahl, and they talk about, Steve Witkoff tragically lost his son, Andrew, at the age of 22, a drug overdose. They're going in to talk to the lead negotiator for Hamas, who's just lost his son in Qatar when the Israelis went in. And, Jared talks about how effective it was when these two fathers who'd lost their sons talked to each other. And, very poignant, and being able to sort of cut through the noise like that and speak human to human, I'm sure is very effective. It's also something that the New York real estate barons know how to do instinctively. They wouldn't
find a common.
They want to understand this is the art of negotiation. At the risk of sounding like Donald Trump, because nothing gets written down. It is all about going into a room, kind of knowing ahead of time who you're dealing with, what their Achilles heel is, and being somewhat flippant, in the world of New York real estate is when it could be something like, do they need a girlfriend? Do they need a
or boyfriend?
Exactly.
Whatever floats your boat.
But it is all about and I've written a book about this. So I do think that two things can be true at once, and I do feel it's important that I want to give Jared Kushner credit, props for doing this thing, which is an extraordinary thing to have done. You
mentioned James Patterson. You're now working with the legendary James Patterson. You had a book earlier this year about the Idaho murders, gruesome murders of 4 college kids by Brian Koberger. I think that case has fascinated the nation.
Yeah.
And the one question that keeps coming up is why? Why did he do it? Like, what was his motivation for such a gruesome killing?
Well, I think everything.
Or was he just a sicko?
Well, he was definitely very much on the spectrum, and he was very much a loner. I think but a lot of people are like that in the age of the internet.
Sure.
I mean, what he clearly had developed was a very strong misogyny. That was born out of a lot of time spent online. I mean, this is a guy who had no known actual real relationships with women. And what we do know about the time, once he got, I mean, in some ways it's a tragic story. This is a guy who overcame great poverty. He overcame heroin addiction. He manages to enroll at Washington State University as a PhD student in criminology. I mean, he's a clever bloke. But this ought to be the greatest summit of his achievement, and socially, he's a fish out of water, and he's filled with anger. I mean, that I really got from my reporting. In class, he would talk over the women, roll his eyes at the women. Women he taught got frightened by him. He followed a woman out to the car, and his treatment of women were really what got him fired. And so I think, nobody knows for sure why he targeted the house at King Road in Moscow. But I know that the 4 families of the 4 victims, I think, believe, based on everything all the evidence that's now in, that he was going after one of them. And the one would have been Maddie Mogan, whose room he went straight for when he entered the house. And there are parallels.
And were the other people just unlucky? The other kids were just unlucky to be there? Because one of the victims was a bloke.
Right. So Kaylee Gonzalez, who was lying in bed with Maddie Mogan, her best friend, was only there for the night visiting. She had actually packed up and left a few weeks earlier. She'd already graduated.
Right.
And it seems very clear from what we now know that Zana, who was on the floor below, was still awake. She had just had a food delivery. She was still awake and moving around. She heard what was going on, and that's why they had a tussle. Right. And she fell back into the room, and a lot of defensive wounds on her. And Ethan, her boyfriend, was he was actually fast asleep in the bed behind her. But I think, the police sort of said to me, if you Brian Kohberger ended up stabbing 4 people in a very short amount of time. It's physically exhausting when your adrenaline's pumping, because people say, well, then why did he not then go for Dylan, who the 5th roommate, who then sees him. Right. And one, she shut her door, and 2, by the adrenaline would have been pumping. I mean, particularly if he'd gone in aiming for one, and then got the 4. I mean, I think and there are parallels. These were all sorority girls, and there is a guy who Kohberger was definitely familiar with, who's a sort of incel hero, a guy called Elliot Rodger, who became the sort of martyr of the incel movement back in 2012. And, he wrote a manifesto, a diary of his life. He couldn't get any girl to sleep with him. And he basically said, I'm now going to go out and take my revenge on all the sorority girls, who turned me down. And he went out and did exactly that, sending the video to his mother on his way. And when we do know that when Brian Kohberger was doing his undergrad, he and in DeSales University, he and his classmates saw the videos that Elliot Rodger made. He filmed himself sitting in his BMW in the California hills saying, this is what I'm going to go out and do. So we know that he was exposed to that.
Wow. You've now teamed up with James Patterson on another book. I don't know if we get time for all these books, but this one's about Luigi Mangione, the United Healthcare murder. Again, another fascinating case. Really what do you think is the deal with these young women who have this kind of unbridled lust for Luigi? We saw them queue up at the courts. We saw them in the hearing. Like, what do you think is that driving that?
Well, obviously, I can't give too much away because this is a work in progress.
I'll give a little bit away, just a little.
I don't
little
think
tease.
so. I'll tell you this though: it's not. I mean, obviously, Luigi Mangione has a huge fan base. It isn't just. I mean, yes, there are a lot of young women in it for very obvious reasons. But what's been surprising to me is the range of people that he appeals to, and it's men, and it's also older women and men too. I mean, and I think it's.
Do you think that's because of the political climate that they see him as this kind of anti-hero, like a Robin Hood almost, instead of robbing from the rich and giving to the poor, he's murdering the rich and giving the poor some hope. I don't know. What there's something that drives that. I see people like Luigi T-shirts. He's kind
100%.
of this sort of figure.
I think that Robin Hood is a good analogy, and it's to do, I think, specifically with the health insurance industry,
right.
and with United Health, which has grown and grown and grown, become incredibly. I mean, it really is pretty much a monopoly, I think, at this point, and health insurance is almost. It's not the biggest thing they even do at this point. And I think everybody knows somebody who's had
something knocked back or a claim kind of screwed with. Yeah.
And I think there's something that people find repellent. And it also has to do with how, when somebody's doctor says to them, well, you really need to get an MRI or you need to get surgery, and then some faceless person
being counted behind the scenes
phones
is
them
denied
up and says, this is Joe, and sorry, you have to continue to suffer for another year, and then maybe
we'll get your claim going.
I think that everybody, doesn't matter what your politics are, and doesn't really matter what your gender is or what age you are, everybody has a really negative response to that. Not saying that industry. Obviously everyone should condone murder, but I think that is why why Luigi Mangione touches complicated emotions in a wide range of people.
Moving on to a bit lighter fare for a second. This time last week, I was uptown staking out the Redbird AGM.
Of course you are.
I was there with a snapper Vicky in old school sort of tabloid shoe leather techniques and seeing the comings and goings. And one of the people that was presenting was Barry Weiss. And she was there as we reported, and as Matt Drudge picked up and ran it very high on the Drudge Report last week with a beefy bodyguard, so half a dozen beefy bodyguards.
I love that.
She has become sort of a lightning rod in the media industry. She's kind of the story of the moment. Everyone's kind of talking about CBS News and about her, and everyone has an opinion. I'm sure you do.
Yeah.
I'm curious about what it is.
Well, I'm just really excited, actually, to see what she does. I've met Barry Weiss. I sat through a talk she gave about 6 months ago, and I was struck by how likable she and her wife, Nellie Bowles, are. And listen, I think that she's a breath of fresh air. And I love the fact, and she's brave. She believes certain things. I might not agree with everything, but she wouldn't mind that. The point is, she wants everybody to stick up their hands and say what they think. And I thought very gutsy, go into CBS and say, okay, why don't we get the secretaries of state, the former secretaries of state, to come on the show? And there was all this skepticism for, people, good journalism requires sort of guts and courage and not being afraid to pick up the phone the old-fashioned way. And, they're all like, oh, well, we don't think we can do that. And she does it. And then she got Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff.
She's her own booking department.
Yeah, that's what we call a scoop.
I get.
So I think she's young and bright, and not every idea she has may work. Who cares? Barry Diller, another Barry.
One I've worked for, one you've worked for.
Barry Diller. He's been around the block. Very, very smart guy as well. Used to say, the point it's like you got to take a plate of pasta and throw it against the wall and see what sticks. Yeah, and I think that's what she's going to do. But the important thing is that plates of pasta are being thrown against the wall. They might,
maybe even people's heads right now at CBS News.
But
I hopefully they'll tip me, breaker at breakermedia.com. Plate of pasta's being thrown at your head at CBS News. Please get in touch. You've seen it from the inside of all these legacy places. You went independent. You went to Substack. Yeah. Do you miss, the infrastructure of being in a legacy place? Do you someone like me who's newish to this? I started in February on Beehive with Breaker. Yeah. There are some days I'm like, this is a little lonely. I miss bouncing ideas off an editor. I miss having a colleague come to me and be like, hey, did you see this? I had this tip. What do you miss about it? But what have you gained by going independent?
Well, so I think at my advanced age, Lachlan, I get the benefits of being at a sort of well-known platform because of the risk of sounding really pompous. I am Vicky Ward.
You are, and you're investigating.
So people at this point, I think it would be much harder if I was starting out
from scratch.
But when I was at Vanity Fair, I remember, people returned your call, even
because
if it was to say,
Fair.
even if it was to say, thank you so much,
comment.
but no thank you. Yeah. They returned your call.
That's what they say about the New York Times. The benefit of working the New York Times is people will call you back, even if they've got nothing to say.
Right. But I can see if you're just starting out, there's probably a benefit to being a sort of, legacy media. But I would also say that the flip side of that, particularly, at Substack, is that Hamish
is hot sauce every Tuesday in Breaker.
So I would say they do a phenomenal job at actually getting us to interview each other, to work with each other, to cross-pollinate, because it really...
You're part of this network, Substack network.
It really grows your own readership. And so I don't really feel alone, ever.
Maybe it's just me. Maybe I need to buy a puppy or something. Maybe it's just...
Well, I also think I think
a Breaker puppy. Vicky, maybe that's on the Christmas card list.
They can, so there you go.
I can bring the puppy on the stakeouts
and you
with
can
the
have
hat.
With that puppy can. I was going to say the puppy can
puppy
have a
this
hat.
little Breaker fedora. Puppy fedora. Yeah.
There you go. So that's what I think. And I think, one of the reasons I write these books, and I'm really glad that the Idaho 4 was about a generation that's obviously, younger than me, and so is, in a sense, the Luigi Mangione book. And because that helps me, I'm constantly interacting with, a different generation.
Right,
and
that's exposed to your work. And
but it keeps me engaged and it keeps me learning.
Right.
I'm not just talking to the wall because I'm learning about people who've grown up completely informed by the internet in a way that I wasn't, who've grown up on their phones in a way that,
doom scrolling all day. The way that we would just go through a magazine or a newspaper.
But I feel that in the way that it would always be helpful to go to an office or to talk to your colleagues, this is what, as long as you're talking to people, it's not the same people all the time. Now, that might be your problem.
Right.
I don't know. But
I'm talking to myself too much. Is that what you're saying?
But I think that...
We're doing this clinical psychology session on the Breaker Pod this week. So different from previous editions.
So I think that, I always feel like I just, every day, I learn something that I go to bed at night thinking, my God, wow. I mean, and that's why you keep going.
Well, you've kept going, and you've been chronicling power for all of these years. Who wields it well, and who's faking it?
Well,
and it could be in media. We could be talking in media adjacent, so politics, Silicon Valley, but who wields their power very cleverly and smartly, and who's faking it until they're trying to make it?
So I tell you, she's a friend. She's not a close friend, and I have worked for her before, but I think Emma Tucker at the Wall Street Journal is a class act. Mm-hmm. She's done multiple things very, very...
She's been in Breaker many a mention
but
this
she
year.
Came in with a remit to
shake it up.
To
throw the spaghetti out.
To change it, and she's done it in a way that you have not I haven't read about, broken china or fights in the newsroom. She's done it in a way that she's managed to keep the newsroom on her side, which is critical. And I think
some people have been, I think, niggly in the background about being
there's
put on
always
pips
going to
and-
be some
Yeah.
people, but by and large, I think she's made the paper. I think it's fantastic.
Do you think we are living in a golden age of journalism, or do you think that age is behind us? Because you've got this sprouting of all these independents. We're doing this off 3 iPhones at Delmonico's. We didn't need a big studio.
Yeah.
You know, you and I, pushing out our newsletters.
Yeah.
We're seeing some of these legacy outlets, layoffs and consolidation and dying. Are we in a golden age, or is that already behind us?
I know you may not feel like this at the moment, Lachlan. I think this is the golden age, and I'm a gunslinger. And
We're the golden girls.
I think you are a gunslinger.
Very kind.
And I think
high praise coming from you.
I think that if you are somebody who likes to be out in the field, likes to you're a people-based reporter, and this is our moment, because actually you get to choose your own stories, you get to trust your own gut, you get to talk, you get to build, you get to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And so I think you have to be a little bit brave. And
or stupid like me. Yeah.
Well, brave and stupid. Remember, 2 things can be true at once.
That's true. Yeah,
and I think you got to hustle. But I think this is a pretty great moment for journalists. And I think the wheat will get sorted from the chaff, and that's okay. That's as it should be.
Vicky Ward, thank you for coming on the Breaker Pod. You can watch this pod on YouTube, where you can like and subscribe. You can also listen on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your pods. You can also subscribe to Breaker at breakermedia.com, and we'll be back next week. Cheers.